Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. Okay, so we've got Suella Braverman saying that Islamists have taken over the UK. We've got Lee Anderson, the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party, saying that Islamists have got control of Sadiq Khan, the London mayor. And we've got Oliver Dowden, the deputy prime minister, denying that any of this is Islamophobic. But the upside of all of this is that I now have the evidence to show you that the Tory strategy is bad for all ethnic minorities, including Jewish people. But I'm not going to lie to you, this video was hard for me to make, mainly because I had to read through all of Suella Braverman's article talking about how Islamists have bullied Britain into submission. So let's start there. She opens by saying, they started with the Jews. Now what she's referring to there is a poem from 1946 by Martin Niemöller about the Holocaust, where he lists the people the Nazis came for in order, starting with the communists, then socialists, and he didn't speak out. Then they came for the Jews, and then they came for him, and there was no one left to speak for him. So Suella Braverman is implying that they, by which she means Islamist cranks and left-wing extremists, will eventually come for you. And when she talks about the Islamist cranks and left-wing extremists taking over the streets, she's talking about the marches against the genocide in Gaza, which she previously referred to as hate marches, because obviously anybody who opposes genocide must have hate in their heart. She even accused Keir Starmer of being in hock to the Islamists because he pressured the Parliament Speaker to let Labour avoid having to vote on an unconditional ceasefire, which would have made Labour look bad to a public that overwhelmingly wants a ceasefire. So tell me, Suella, are 2/3 of the public radical Islamists? She even refers to Israel's genocide in Gaza as a noble mission to recover those poor hostages. Like, we're talking about one of the most advanced militaries and intelligence agencies in the world. And you're telling me that the only option they had to find and neutralize the terrorists responsible for the attack of October 7th in a territory that they effectively control was this: to bomb them indiscriminately, killing tens of thousands of people and likely some hostages alongside with that, and you call that a noble mission? But the bit at the end is where she goes really off the rails, because she talks about British values being diluted. Now that, by definition, is the language of national purity. She wants to keep this country pure, and she talks about cleaning up campuses, mosques, councils. Any of this sound alarming to you? She even talks about Sharia law taking over. Now, back in 2016, when I was campaigning against Brexit, just before the referendum, I met this guy in Birmingham, and he had some views. I actually didn't upload that video for a fair few days because I was worried that I didn't want to portray the most extreme side of the Brexiteers, because that wouldn't be fair. Have a listen.
What do you think will happen if we stay?
If we stay, the doors will be open, right?
Yeah.
More and more people will flood in, right? The law, we won't be able to do the things that we want.
Yeah.
We won't have. We shall the law.
What? So what?
We shall the law.
Sharia law.
Yeah, because
will become enforced in England.
Yeah, it will be, because sooner or later it will.
Can you please point to the law in English law, in British law, which will allow Sharia law to become the law here?
It's already happening. You know, there's been a law, Sharia law, where they're standing up, and they're trying to bring this before the government. They have done it. They've tried.
Okay, an attempt to bring Sharia law into the government doesn't mean that they're actually able to do that.
No, but they're attempting.
Yeah, but they can't. Doesn't mean it. I mean, I can attempt to fly. No matter how much I flap my arms, it's not going to happen.
And now, the former Home Secretary of the Get Brexit Done government is actively pushing those ideas in the Telegraph. Hindsight is a painful thing. And then we have Lee Anderson, who actually tries to distance himself a little bit from Suella Braverman.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan.
Now, you've almost definitely heard the commentary calling that Islamophobic against Sadiq Khan, but I want to give you the full story, because this is what he says afterwards.
And they've got control of London, and they've got control of Starmer as well.
Now, you could argue that if he's saying it about Keir Starmer as well, then it's not Islamophobic, because he's not singling out Sadiq Khan as a Muslim. But he goes on to say,
and again, this stems with Khan. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates. We've got Starmer there, we're using Khan's pockets.
So he says Sadiq Khan is mates with Islamists and that Keir Starmer is in Sadiq Khan's pockets, i.e. Sadiq Khan is the one who's calling the shots. So he's saying that the Muslim mayor of London is mates with and controlled by Islamists, and that he also controls the future Prime Minister of the UK. This is the kind of conspiracy theory you'd hear on a Trump Facebook group. And then listen to Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden avoid the question of was that Islamophobic over and over again.
The question I asked you is does the Conservative Party's suspension of Mr. Anderson mean that at least he is suspected of being a racist?
Well, What the words that he chose to use were not the right words to use. They were the wrong words.
Just for the record, what he just said there, of the words he used were not the right words, they were the wrong words. That's the kind of thing you'd expect to hear from a parody by Rosie Holt. And with Laura Kuenssberg, he still refuses to call it Islamophobic, but his reasoning for that is this.
Do you agree, though, that the remarks were Islamophobic, anti-Muslim?
I don't believe that Lee Anderson said those remarks intending to be Islamophobic.
I'm not asking you about Lee Anderson's intent. I'm asking you what you believe.
Well, but I think the two of them kind of go together, Laura.
Sorry, when does a racist who's being racist ever say that they're racist? And this is the point. The Tories will constantly deny the existence of bigotry.
I don't believe that Lee is in any way racist.
I don't believe that the language used by Suella Braverman has crossed the line.
And this is how they ensure that bigotry and racism continue. When they publish their race report that denied that institutional racism even exists, the United Nations call that an attempt to normalize white supremacy. Because you can't fix a problem if you refuse to acknowledge that it's even there. And the fact that they've kicked Lee Anderson out of the Parliamentary Conservative Party means they know it was Islamophobic. They're simply refusing to acknowledge that, because that goes against their whole strategy. And the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, raised a really good point about the most well-known anti-Semitic trope about Jewish people controlling society.
If they have got control, if that was related to Jewish people, that would straight away be called out as anti-Semitism. But there's a double standard here. They don't call it out in that same way.
Which is just more evidence that the Tories know they're being Islamophobic. And when it comes to Jewish people, the Tories have rightly been calling out the massive rise in anti-Semitism in recent months. But here's the issue. The massive rise in anti-Semitism in recent months comes from the fact that less evolved people are blaming ordinary Jewish people for the actions of the Israeli government in Gaza. So logically, anybody with a platform would be doing their best to say ordinary Jewish people in the UK are not responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. But have you heard a single Tory even utter anything coming even close to that? If they cared even a little bit about Jewish people in the UK, wouldn't they be trying to put out messages like this from Jewish people?
Okay, so that's what I believe.
Britain's Jews are not to blame for the Gaza tragedy.
Okay, we know we didn't help to elect the Netanyahu government. We don't pay Israeli taxes. The opinions that we may or may not have very little influence on Israeli policy.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that politicians should therefore make a greater effort to separate out the actions of the Netanyahu government from Jewish people in general?
Absolutely, yeah.
We represent Israelis on the far left of all of them who oppose the demolition of homes, which is ethnic cleansing.
I am Jewish. I have been horrified by what's been happening in Israel-Palestine for decades now. This is a question of right and wrong. You have 2.3 million people who are being collectively punished for the sins of Hamas. It was awful what they did. 1,400 Israelis, something like that, were killed during that attack. And it is, it was an awful atrocity, and we cannot use that and to justify that to bring a war crime on Gaza, on the people of Gaza.
Instead, the Tories are endangering Jewish people by acting like any protest against the genocide in Gaza is a protest against Jewish people. They're pushing out Islamophobic conspiracy theories online, and they're trying to normalize white supremacy. This is the Tory party. We have to do better. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so Politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.